Okay, we're getting into the CSS. We're getting into the fun styling stuff. Hopefully you like making things look pretty because we're making our way towards that. It's not going to look super pretty just yet, but we're going to get there bit by bit. So we have our stuff. We can start styling a bit more. Let's learn a little bit more about some more properties, some ones that are really important to us that we use all the time, but don't necessarily have such simple values or have ways to enter in different types of values. So we saw with text align, for instance, we have center. We see with colors, we can enter in the names of colors. Now, there's another way to do colors because let's say you want a darker green, you might not know how do I write dark green. So we use a few different ways of doing this, but one of the common ones are called hex codes. So if we look at a hex code, we can go to something like one of these websites here. I do this all the time, programmers do this, and you move this color thing around and it'll give you this number here, this thing, it says hex. That you can enter into CSS also, and it'll change that to that color. So we're going to pick one here. Let's make it a little darker, a little red. Okay, so a red one that we can change our equals button to that instead, and we put that that sign there, the hash sign or whatever, and then we change that, and there we go. Now the equal sign has changed. So the values aren't always super obvious. Now, some other important things to know is certain values take numbers, take pixels, take percentages. There's other types of units. A lot of this you're going to learn because you're going to want to do something. You're going to be like, how do I get these two things to line up or be wide enough or stretch to fill or put under the other? And you're going to Google around and you're going to find answers and you're going to be pasting stuff in. I can't go over all of it here, and it would be crazy to because you would just forget it all. But what I want to give you is some of the core of knowing that these varieties of how CSS work and throwing some very common ones at you. So we don't want to memorize CSS. We'll memorize it over time by using it a lot, but you don't want to go out there and try to memorize it because it'll drive you crazy. So width and height are very important. That's a very important one that we want to use. Let's say we want this input to be maybe 100% of the width, or we want it to be shorter, like only the width of the buttons. So to do that, first of all, we're going to give a class, and we could give an ID. Why don't we give an ID instead? We'll say text input. That's what we'll call it. So when it's text input, and we copy that, and we gave it an ID, so it's a hash thing, and then we can say width, and we can say 100%. Okay, and that will make it 100% of whatever div that it's in. Now, if we inspect, we can see here that as we hover over this, we can see the div on the screen above is that same width. It's 100% of the width of the page. Okay, so then that means the text input will fill whatever the div's width is. So if I say 50%, it will fill 50% of the div. Now, I can actually also change the width of that div, which is kind of a crazy thing. So if I give the div a class, div class equals parent container, that's a common way we talk about divs is as containers. So I say parent container, and I put parent container, and I say the width of the parent container will be 50%. Now when I save, everything, you can see everything that's inside that div goes to, it's marked off at that 50% place. And if I hover over it here, you can see that it gives this like orange look on the right side, which is basically saying, oh, the div isn't over there. That's just like empty space beside the div. The main div is this 50% blue box there. So that gives us some sense of why we nested HTML, and we can again change our text input now to be the 100% width, and it'll only fill up the div. It's not just going to 100% of the page. Okay, we can also use pixels, and there are other units with width. There are lots of different units. So without really knowing pixels, this is a bit weird, but the idea is you can give it specific units. So if I needed it to be specifically a certain width, I could say, oh, be 100 pixels, or I could say, oh, be 105, and it's a little longer. Oh, it'd be 205, and it's a little longer. We don't always work in percentages. So pixels is a very straightforward way to make them exactly the width you want. Let's say I wanted it exactly the width of the buttons. I could just kind of work by trial and error and say, okay, maybe I'll make that 85. Oh, maybe it's less, maybe it's 65. Oh, it's a little bit more, it's 70. And it's pretty much the width of the buttons now, right? So we can do that kind of thing. We're going to change it back to 100% because I think that looks kind of nice. And I'm just pressing Control. There we go. Okay, so that's width, and height works in a similar way. We can also say height. Generally, we don't give percentages for height. It's a confusing thing, but don't think about it too much. Just think of height more as something where you're entering specific values for it. It's just easier that way. Trust me on that one for now. You'll thank me later. So height, we generally will use some kind of specific value. Width, we'll sometimes use percentages. Okay, now we have something called margin. Margin and this other associated thing called padding are something we use all the time. So margin and padding are kind of what creates space between elements. So for instance, for our header here, it's not flush up against the top of the page. And that's because by default, a header has margin. So if we went to our header and we gave it a class of header, heading, let's do heading, and we put that up at the top, and we say margin 0, we're going to find that it goes up a lot further. Now the rest of its space and why it's still far away is another property called line height that's not very important. It just has to do with fonts. Again, one we can set aside for later. But another important one aside from margin is padding, which also deals with the space around things. Now a good way to illustrate this and to remember it is that margin is for the outside of an element and padding is for the inside. So buttons make this quite easy to see. So for our buttons, let's say we make the padding 0. We're going to see them all get real squished up because there's no space around the text anymore. By default, the padding probably has, I don't know what value it by default has, but we could look at it in the inspector if we really wanted. But let's make our padding be something like 10 pixels. Now we're going to see the buttons get a lot bigger, but that's just because the padding got larger. Now we can actually give multiple values to this because some of these CSS things, actually the padding is being applied to the top, the right, the bottom, and the left. So when we say 10 pixels, we're saying give 10 pixels for every one of these values. So that's all a little crazy. We're going to use it. We're going to get into it. But let's try giving 10 pixels for the top and bottom, or let's try giving 5 pixels for the top and bottom values by giving it first, and 10 pixels for the right and left. And we'll see how that kind of looks. They're a little more square, a little more neat looking. Now, margin is going to be between the elements. So if I give a margin of 10 pixels, you're going to see they all spread out. So padding's on the inside, margin's on the outside. I think we probably want our margin to be fairly small, something like 2 pixels. Looks like okay. Of course, I don't like the colors of these buttons very much, but we'll fix that up. So those are some more advanced concepts in CSS and a few more properties. We went over padding, margin, we went over width and height, the idea of pixels, the idea of percentages, the idea of having multiple values. It gets so much more complicated and I don't want to get bogged down. But we're going to have one more lesson that's kind of contextual here, going over something that's really important in CSS, which is putting divs, these different div containers, beside each other. So we'll go over that in the next one, and then we'll get back to actually styling this calculator and making it look good.